Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Speech Therapy hosted by Ian McCrary. Now, you guys all know I'm Ian McCrary, and you also know that this is episode 6, part 2, in continuation of the saga that is The Great Gatsby. Now, I know I told you guys in the last episode, part 1, that for this episode, I would get right into it, but I did some thinking, and I've come to this conclusion that what kind of guy would I be if I didn't at least read the last paragraph of part 1 and then segue right into what I have for part 2. That way, for the people who have listened maybe a week ago that had forgotten what happened at the end of part 1, will be on the same page with the people who just listened a couple days ago. And they wouldn't have to go back and listen on their own. I'm going to be nice enough to read the last paragraph and then segue right into what I have for part 2. But before I do all of that, I do want to take this time to check in with you guys and to just tell you that, I'm glad you're here. I love you. Thanks for listening. And I'm having a pretty great day. Yeah, it's a pretty great day. It's cold all of a sudden for fall. It was just 80 degrees last week, and now today we're in like the low 40s. I think it's about 43 degrees out today. I have no idea where the cold came from all of a sudden, but I really feel like it's here to stay. We just had a hurricane hit Charleston, Hurricane Nicole. But I don't think it did as much damage as, the historic Hurricane Ian that hit the coast of Florida and completely decimated Fort Miles. I joked with my friends and family and coworkers that, I may have sent a hurricane down to Cuba, but looks like Florida got caught in the crossfire, and they had a good laugh about that. I didn't really send a hurricane down there, guys. I was just joking, but for the people who do live in Florida, I am very sorry. I hope you get back right. I'm praying for you guys. My heart goes out to you. It was all a joke. I did not really send a hurricane down there. I only said that because the hurricane was named after me. May not have been spelled the same way as my name is, but, it's said the same. And I figured I would jump on that clout, but, the cloud was very negative and not positive at all. So moving on from that, we are now into fall, guys. It's November. Can you believe it? October went by just like that. October came to the party, made a plate, smiled, and left. October ran away from us like it stole something, okay? October had somewhere to be, all right? Let's just put it to you like that. And in 2 months' time, literally because we're in the middle of this one, I'm not even going to count it. So maybe in 1 month's time, we'll already be in a new year. It'll be 2023. Guys, can you believe that? So much has happened this year. We've had another global outbreak. And my little brother had a baby. Okay? There's so much has gone on. I'm thankful to be here. I'm blessed. I'm thankful for you. And, I love you guys because, tomorrow isn't promised, but we're all here and we're all still trying to just make it. So I didn't mean to get heavy on you, but I just had to let you guys know how I feel. And I had to check in with you guys because you never know what's going on in somebody's life. I hope that you guys are doing good. I'm trying to keep my head above water, and I'm pretty sure you're doing the same. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and get on into the last paragraph of part 1 and then segue right on into part 2. That is The Great Gatsby. Nick lies and says, quote, "Not for a while," end quote, And then we are brought back and forth between Gatsby and Daisy kissing and talking to Tom and Nick drinking and talking. Tom walks off looking for Daisy, and Nick joins Gatsby and Daisy in the discreet spot, but only for a short minute before Gatsby is whisked away once again for quote-unquote business. Daisy and Tom eventually leave the party, and Nick finds Gatsby at the end of it all, and they talk about the evening's festivities as well as the plan that Gatsby has for Daisy and him to, quote, start over, end quote. They talk more, and then this is when Nick says to Gatsby, quote, you can't repeat the past, end quote. Which, in my opinion, is the whole struggle of the story and the book itself when it comes to The Great Gatsby. He kept trying to make Daisy understand that he wanted to relive all those moments they had, marry each other where he promised her he would, and grow old with her in the mansion that he bought across the bay from hers. Daisy wants to run away from it all, but Gatsby can't because he is too tied up with all the organized crime and the empire he built and placed himself at the center of. Honestly, if Gatsby would have just moved the fuck on, then the story would have ended differently. But it's because he wanted Daisy to tell Tom that she, quote, never loved him, end quote. And his greediness for her love and affection is what ultimately was his downfall. Allegedly. In the next couple of scenes, we go through a montage of people and paparazzi crowding Gatsby's house, wondering where his parties had gone. Gatsby and Daisy making love and standing on the dock watching the green light across the bay. Gatsby firing all his staff because he didn't want them gossiping to the press about Daisy spending time with him. Nick at work on Wall Street while simultaneously on the phone with Gatsby. And at the end of it all, we see Gatsby asking Nick to join Daisy and him for the big lunch where she tells Tom she, quote, never loved him, end quote, and that Gatsby and her were going to get married. I thought that the montage was very well done. Credits given to Lerman for also providing the band The XX a chance to give their score for the background music because it was executed perfectly. I may have rewatched that particular montage at least 3 times. Guys, it is that well done. Hands down, one of the best moments in the film. But going back to the story, Gatsby asking Nick to be there for him and Daisy while she told Tom she, quote, never loved him, end quote, felt like a callback to what I first discussed at the beginning of episode 5, part 1. Why do men need other men to hold their hand while they perform some anxious/sexual act? Why did Nick have to be there? To play mediator? For emotional support? Although those could be very good reasons for why Gatsby asked Nick to be there, for emotional support, for mediation. Personally, I don't think Nick has the capabilities to be a mediator between Gatsby and Tom because, you know, he's kind of a scrub. But hell, I could be wrong. But the real problem I can't seem to wrap my head around, Gatsby has the wealthiest side of New York in the palm of his hand. He has organized crime softly holding his balls and keeping his butt cheeks high and tight like a new pair of underwear. Hollywood starlets and Wall Street businessmen flock to his grand parties like his parents left for the weekend and he's throwing a high school raider with an open keg. Gatsby's influence is so prominent during this time, it just blows my mind that this woman and the situation reduces his character so dramatically that he has to ask Nick to simply just be there. Nothing else. Like a 3-year-old child asking for a small cup of juice. And again, his love for Daisy burned so deep that he became a we person in his flirtationship with her, basically overnight. You know, the kind of people who are so in love, they become we. We hate that restaurant. We only eat non-fat yogurt. We would never call the police on you simply because you're black. Because we love black people. We. Gatsby asked Nick, quote, will you be there, old sport? I need you. We need you. End quote. Gatsby, dude, where did your balls go? Back to the film. So, there they all sat, smoking, looking crazy. Tom and Gatsby share words, but again, the words seemed very strained for obvious reasons. Daisy suggests they all go to town because she was obviously nervous, and Gatsby seemed a bit stressed, but doing his best to put a face on. But Tom dismisses the idea completely and makes a misogynistic comment about women getting crazy, spontaneous notions. We all know Tom is an asshole, but dude, come on. Really? You're really gonna make a comment like that when all Daisy did was make a suggestion to go out and have fun because she was tired of sitting in a chair watching you and Gatsby go back and forth comparing your dicks? All of us in the LGBTQIA+ community know for a scientific fact that men who treat women like lesser than or complete shit have a dick size no bigger than the ring on an Italian mobster's pinky finger. Tom has a small dick, ladies and gentlemen. Myrtle had to be faking those orgasms. She had to. Allegedly. Daisy is so nervous, she drops the cigarette lighter from her hands, and it hit the ground with such a loud... I'm pretty sure they heard the sound it made all the way in China. Have you ever seen a cigarette lighter from the 1920s? Those things are massive. They look like the office space heaters we use in today's time. I can't imagine carrying something that large around whenever I needed to light my cigarette. I can't imagine. Gatsby rushes to her aid and places it back in her hands, and Nick, Jordan, and Tom stare at them as the two share a moment so intimate, Tom physically reacts, and suddenly, filled with jealousy, he says, quote, "Let's go to town then," end quote. Oh, so now you want to go to town. Really? Fascinating. After a small back and forth between Tom and Daisy, in which Daisy delivers my favorite line from both the book and the film, quote, "I changed my mind, you brute," end quote. They all pile in two cars. Daisy and Gatsby in Tom's car, Tom, Nick, and Jordan in Gatsby's car. They had 2 bottles of whiskey, and they basically raced each other all the way to New York until Tom pulls over in the Valley of the Ashes for gas. He learns from Wilson that he wants to move Myrtle out west, and it is here that we, the audience, see that Tom is actually getting scared because both his wife and his mistress were slowly being pulled away from him. As they should, because no amount of wealth in the world can buy Tom a new sense of self-control or pride. I don't know how Tom has both a wife and a mistress. It's beyond even me. Must be the money. Has to be. Because sex isn't pleasurable with a dick the size of a pinky ring. Ladies and gentlemen, and fellow gay men listening to this. And with his ego being that big, has to be the money. Allegedly. They all make it into town together, got a room, had men in the room chipping away at ice blocks for their whiskey they had brought, and then they all had the audacity to complain about it being hot. Not only in the hotel room itself, but New York in general. Excuse me? You guys should have kept your asses sitting down in that mansion where it was cooler if it was going to be like that. I mean, can you imagine? The privilege. Gatsby and Tom go back and forth about who Gatsby really is and how he does business. Daisy plays mediator until she herself becomes a subject of the mess, and all the tension that's been building up between Gatsby and Tom finally reaches a boiling point. They are going ham on each other, okay? It's like a drama scene from Degrassi, how petty and childish they were being. Nick and Jordan are just along for the ride. Honestly, they sat there the entire time, quiet, composed, and their eyes went back and forth between all 3 of these wealthy human beings, bite into each other, and completely go for blood. What happens next in the film is completely different than what happens in the book. In the book, Tom says to Gatsby, quote, "Walter could have you up on the betting laws too, but Wolfsheim scared him into shutting his mouth. That drugstore business was just small change, but you've got something on now that Walter's afraid to tell me about." End quote. For context, ladies and gentlemen, Wolfsheim and Gatsby bought a lot of side street drugstores in New York and Chicago so they could sell bootleg alcohol over the counter. Bootlegging. Tom found this out from Walter Chase, who was a friend of Tom's and a business partner to Gatsby's. Walter Chase hated Gatsby because he was in debt to him, but Gatsby defended himself by saying Walter Chase came to him and Wolfsheim dead broke and was, quote, very glad to pick up money, end quote. Guys, all of this is an unnecessary mess. Quote, you've got something on now that Walter's afraid to tell me about, end quote, was Tom's way of telling Gatsby that he knows about Wolfsheim and how he fixes bets and whoever pays him the highest favor. He knows. Gatsby visibly gets uncomfortable and immediately tries to tell Daisy it's all not true, defending his name against the wild accusation from Tom's mouth. But Daisy draws further and further within herself because she believed that Gatsby wasn't a bootlegger. She believed that he came into his wealth honestly and wouldn't dare associate herself with someone as high on the food chain of organized crime as Gatsby was. But she was wrong, and she was crushed. So crushed. Like her dog just had to be put down crushed. Tom allowed them to leave together, and it's written that they left without another word. Gone. Snapped out like ghosts from Jordan, Nick, and Tom's pity. Their pity! To once again quote my favorite rapper, Nicki Minaj, "Chow, F. Scott Fitzgerald was one hell of a writer." But in the film, okay, Tom and Gatsby are going back and forth like an unhappy married couple. Gatsby pleads with Daisy to tell Tom she never loved him, and when she finally does, Tom almost breaks out in tears, which prompts Daisy to plead with Gatsby that she does love him, but she also loves Tom. The three of them yell at each other and go back and forth, and then Tom and Gatsby get heated in battle. So heated, in fact, that when Tom says, quote, "You have half of Wall Street out there selling your free booze at that fun park every weekend. I'm surprised he hasn't tried to drag you into it," end quote. He gestures to Nick, and it is then that we, the audience, all see the realization strike Tom so heavily that he has tried to drag Nick into it multiple times. And Tom is just beside himself with the, "Oh, I knew it" bit. This is where we start to see Gatsby get visibly angry and nervous about what Tom is saying. Tom says, quote, "Daisy, can't you see who this guy is? With his house, with his parties and fancy clothes, he is just a front for Wolfsheim, the gangster, to get his claws into respectable men like Walter Chase," end quote. Gatsby says, quote, "The only respectable thing about you, old sport, is your money. Your money, that's it. I have just as much as you, and that means we're equal," end quote. Tom says, quote, "Oh no, we're different. I am, they are," he gestures to Nick and Jordan. "She is," he gestures to Daisy. "We were born different. It's in our blood." Guys, I can't express to you enough how long the list of things that we heard in Tom's monologue, the bitterness, the bigotry, the ego, the wealth. I mean, the list goes on for miles. And as Tom speaks, it really does hit home how society in the 1920s versus the society we live in today has taken baby steps within the last century. People with the same mindset as Tom still exist to this day. You pass them on the street. You hear them on podcasts. They run multi-billion-dollar companies. Hell, they may even be your landlord you pay monthly rent to. It's insane how nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. And it's been 100 years. Okay? Tom says other things, but we never fully hear or comprehend what he says because all of a sudden, Gatsby explodes. I'm talking explodes like the bombs dropped over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. His anger comes out in such a worse way. He rips the food, bottles, glass, and table plates off the counter he was leaning on while Tom was mocking him, and holds a fist to Tom's face, screaming, quote, "You shut up, end quote. Daisy was shocked, hands over her mouth, and stared at Gatsby like he murdered her firstborn child. Jordan was horrified, mouth dropped open, and ducked half of her head behind the chair she was lounging on like the coward she really is and not the brave snob she pretends to be. Tom laughed a little, but it's that kind of laugh that belittled Gatsby in spite of himself. You know what I mean? It was the kind of laugh that you give to your friend who was finally brave enough to ask their crush out on a date. Like, damn, bro, didn't think you had it in you, you know? And Nick was the only one as cool as a cucumber. No real reaction at all. Just standing there with an expression so stolid, I swear this man looked like he was a bored patron watching a pastor preach in church. If it were me in the situation, I would have been wide-eyed at the very least, but not Nick Carroway. Gatsby, realizing how out of character he had become in front of all of them, made him immediately plead with Daisy and tell her that this wasn't the real him. But Daisy's ass she was not having it, guys, okay, whatsoever. She, in turn, pleads with Tom to take her away from it all. And Tom suggests Daisy and Gatsby go home in his car. Tom says the famous line, quote, "Go on. He won't bother you anymore." I think he realizes that this little flirtation is over, end quote. Tom calling the relationship between Gatsby and Daisy flirtation is the sole reason why I call it a flirtationship. Daisy runs out of the room so quickly, you'd think someone was after her, and Gatsby follows and calls out to her like a fat kid being violently taken away from Oreo pudding. I would like to take this time to point out the fact that this man, Tom Buchanan, the man who beats women, let his wife go home with another man who came out of character so suddenly, he nearly rearranged Tom's face in front of everyone and didn't think twice about it. That's awful, man. Just awful. Tom does not care about his wife, Daisy, at all. And Gatsby blowing up like that? See, I told you guys he was a serial killer. I told you. All that obsession and 18 volumes worth of scrapbooking, all for her? Very unhealthy. Very. Mental fucking illness. But wait a minute now. We can't throw all the blame on Gatsby and Tom. Because in the next scene, we see Daisy driving 80 miles an hour home with Gatsby in the passenger seat, Wilson threatening Myrtle in the window of their apartment above the shop, and a grim shot of the billboard of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg's eyes overlooking the Valley of Ashes. Wilson is trying to get Myrtle to tell him where she got the pearls that we, the audience, knows Tom bought for her while they were in the city with Nick. She's crying and she has a big bloody gash on her forehead, but instead of coming clean about her affair with Tom, she elbows Wilson in the face and runs away from him downstairs where she sees Gatsby's car speeding towards the shop. Now remember, Myrtle thinks that it is Tom Buchanan driving Gatsby's car because she saw them earlier when he stopped there for gas and he was driving the same car. So what does Myrtle do? Does Myrtle wait for the car to pass and then try to flag it down? Does she wave her arms around her head like a signal for help from a safe distance at the shop? Nope. This broad, Myrtle, runs into the street like an Olympic athlete. Full on. Flailing her arms trying to get the attention of the driver, who she thought was Tom, in front of the car. Like cars from the 1920s doing more than 50 miles an hour can stop on a dime. Girl, what were you thinking? And what does Daisy, the driver doing more than 50 miles an hour, do? Does she come to a screeching halt and turn the car to the side to avoid catastrophe? Does she throw her full weight on the brake, causing the tires to whine and possibly burst from the pressure? Nope. Daisy runs Myrtle down. Okay? Completely. She hits this woman with enough force that not only does it rip her left titty open, but it kills her instantly. And Daisy keeps driving like a bug hit the windshield and she used the fluid and wipers to wash it away like it was the most nonchalant thing in the world. Honestly, I was gagged. Daisy became a ruthless murderer, and I am clutching my pearls. By the time Jordan, Nick, and Tom arrive on the scene, there's already a crowd of people around, and the police are taking down what witnesses are describing to him. Tom's nosy butt decides to stop the car and see what all the fuss is about, much to Jordan's dismay. They all crowd inside and discover Myrtle's lifeless body on the shop table. Tom is in shock. And so is Wilson when someone speaks up and says they know what kind of car it was that ran Myrtle down. Tom and Wilson share a private conversation. This is the pivotal moment in the film where Wilson asks Tom who owns the big yellow car, and Tom says to him, quote, "Gatsby, a fella named Gatsby," end quote. And then later, as Wilson cried into Tom's arms, he mumbled, quote, "Something ought to be done about a fella like that," end quote. But I want to point it out that in the book, Wilson and Tom do not have that conversation at all. In the book, it is said that Wilson did not know who owned the big yellow car that ran Myrtle down. It says this, quote, "By 2:30, he was in West Egg, where he asked someone the way to Gatsby's house. So by that time, he knew Gatsby's name," end quote. It gives no clear indication of who told him Gatsby was the owner of the car, and as the audience reads, we find out by witness testimonies to Wilson's movements before Gatsby's demise that he was, quote, "acting sort of crazy," end quote. Yeah, no shit. The man just lost his wife in a horrific hit and run, and before that, he knew she was having an affair with someone and threatened to beat her if she didn't move away with him. You think things are going to be sunshine and rainbows after all of that? So yeah, Boz, the director, made a big change to the script that I honestly appreciated because not only did it make the story easier to comprehend, but it ties up one or two loose ends F. Scott Fitzgerald so kindly left out in the wind. As Tom, Nick, and Jordan arrive at the Buchanan's mansion, Tom asks Nick to join them for a late dinner, but Nick rudely says no and even drives Jordan away when she tries to get him to come inside as well. He encounters Gatsby hiding out in their gardens, like, bruh, really? Really, Gatsby? And they share a somewhat heated argument about what really happened with the murder of Myrtle Wilson, and we learn that it was Daisy who was driving and ran Myrtle down, not Gatsby. Nick returns home and waits up for Gatsby, who wanted to wait up for Daisy, but she never showed up for him. We saw it coming. Honestly, Gatsby should have seen it too, but he just didn't want to believe it. Nick and Gatsby basically stay up all night talking. And to be honest, guys, I think this is where Nick starts to fall in love with Gatsby just a bit. Hearing him talk and go on and on about the love of his life, his dreams, and more importantly, his hope that Daisy will call him up, yeah, he definitely fell in love with him that night. Before he leaves for work, Nick pays Gatsby a compliment that he says will always live with him for the rest of his life. In a montage of dramatic music and scenes, we see Nick at work on Wall Street, Gatsby go for a swim, Daisy contemplate picking up the phone, Wilson entering Gatsby's mansion with a gun, one of Wolsheim's thugs answering the phone, Wilson shoot Gatsby in the back as he emerges from the pool, Nick hearing the gunshots on the other line and frantically screaming if everything was alright, Daisy dropping her hand from picking up the phone, and Wilson point the gun to his head and pull the trigger. It all happens kind of slowly, but the impact it makes and the narration Nick gives after is so brutal. They pin everything on Gatsby, the affair with Myrtle, the hit and run, everything. Nick does everything he can to get Gatsby's affair in order, but it's kind of a big mess with press in and out taking pictures of Gatsby's lifeless body and finding out Daisy and Tom completely skipped town. It is in that moment that Nick finds out that he was the only one that truly cared about Gatsby. Alright, let's pause the story for a second to discuss the fact that Daisy and Tom grabbed their daughter, all of their belongings, and completely skipped town once they found out that Gatsby was murdered across the bay in his own home. Let's talk about the fact that Daisy was so in love with Gatsby but wouldn't marry him because he didn't have money. All of a sudden be interested in him now that he did have money, lose interest in him once again because she found out how he got his money, and took her baby and husband and completely skipped town. What the actual... I'm at a loss for words. I mean, Daisy Buchanan is the real definition of a city girl almost. I'm sorry. I am so sorry because that is disrespectful to city girls and city women everywhere around the world. But when you really think about the fact that this woman claimed to love him but wouldn't marry him because he was broke, claimed to still be in love with him when she found out he had money, completely lose interest and disassociate with him completely when she found out how he got his money. And then when she found out he was murdered, took her kid and husband and left town completely. That, ladies and gentlemen, no, I don't even know what to say. That, ladies and gentlemen, is textbook cause and effect, guys. Textbook cause and effect. And to make it worse, she didn't even want to take Nick's call. Didn't even reach back out to Nick at all. Her own cousin, her own family member. And Jordan Baker, man, now you guys already know how I feel about her. I'm not even going to get into her. But I mean, it's just the simple fact that you couldn't even call. You couldn't even send a telegraph. Not even in Morse code. You didn't do anything. You just grabbed your kid, grabbed your husband, and completely skipped town. Wow. Ruined this man's life. Led this man on. And then skipped town once he wasn't here anymore. Wow. Wow. No one came to his funeral. No one sent their condolences. Daisy never got back in touch. Didn't even send a flower. He roamed Gatsby's house after Wolfsheim's men completely gutted it and took everything, and memories of the parties he attended haunted him like ghosts in a haunted mansion. In the book, it says that Wilson was reduced to a man deranged by grief after he found out about Myrtle's affair. Catherine, her sister, knew about her and Tom sneaking around, but she swore to the press that her sister had never seen Gatsby and completely loved her husband. Bro, what? Can you believe she said that? Gatsby's father makes an appearance, and so does Wolfsheim, but their significance to the story doesn't really play a huge role, seeing as how we barely knew Gatsby's real father, and Wolfsheim was too much of a coward to come pay his respects at Gatsby's funeral. So you can't come to your business partner's funeral for fear of being outed in association with him, but you can take, haul, and hoard everything away from your business partner's mansion without a second thought? Okay, bitch, I definitely got your number 2 along with Jordan Baker's. Because when it comes to her in the book, it is said that Nick and her did have a final conversation where Nick apologizes to her and he starts to explain his actions. But she tells him that she is, quote, engaged to another man, end quote. They share more bitter words and Nick leaves her, still angry at her and still half in love with her. That honestly baffles the hell out of me, because how could you possibly still be half in love with someone like that? She was selling pussy at Gatsby's parties every weekend, bro. Why would you still be in love with somebody every rich man in New York has taken for a test drive? Make it all make sense. Where is Mr. McKee? Go bark up his tree. The film ends with Nick saying, quote, after Gatsby's death, New York was haunted for me, end quote. And that he remembered how they all came to Gatsby's and basked at his corruption as he stood before them, conceiving an incorruptible dream. He stood at the end of Gatsby's dock and thought about how he missed him, and gave his final monologue that is kind of plagiarized from the book, but not really. He finishes the book he had been writing all this time with, quote, the Great Gatsby, end quote, and the picture fades out with the green light at the end of Daisy's dock, pulsating on and off like a slow heartbeat. A violin is playing softly in the background to accentuate the mood, and as the credits begin to roll, my favorite song, Together, starts playing by the XX. I am deeply impressed by the use of it, actually. The tone of the song itself is so melancholy, and it is just well delivered in its placement with the tone of the film's ending, and I feel like whoever they had on payroll for the soundtrack for the film should get a high praise for years to come for their genius on this part, honestly. Now, before you go looking up the song to what I'm talking about, keep in mind that the song was edited specifically for this film. The studio version sounds very different. Although it is still good, and I recommend you download it, it is not the same version we hear at the end of Baz Luhrmann's The Great Gatsby. Another fact, Sean Jay-Z Carter was one of the executive producers on this film as well. And that's going to do it, guys, for this crazy, wild ride that is/was The Great Gatsby. Thank you so much for listening and making it to the end with me. I know hearing the sound of my voice must have gotten boring at some point, and I really need to work on slowing down and learning how to enunciate and have perfect diction so that you guys don't want to hear me talk like a country bumpkin. I promise. I'm getting better at it. But I appreciate you all, and I love you all. Thank you again so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your morning, day, or evening, or night, whenever you're listening to this. So I'll see you guys on the next episode. Bye. I just wanted to personally take this time to say thank you for listening to another episode of my podcast. I hope you keep listening. Know that I love you so much. And remember, you're listening to Speech Therapy on Podcast Radio.